Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington. The White House is facing major questions right now about what happens next, with the president giving mixed signals about potential military action against Iran over its lethal crackdown on protesters, while renewing his vow to annex Greenland. Starting with the latest on Iran, sources telling NBC News that the Pentagon today is presenting the president with options related to potential military action in Iran. It comes as the Pentagon is evacuating hundreds of troops from the U.S. base in Qatar ahead of any retaliation potentially from Iran in response if there is a U.S. action. President Trump has warned of very strong action if the Iranian regime proceeds with the execution of protesters. And according to the State Department earlier today, Iran was expected to carry out its first execution of a protester, a 26-year-old who was arrested near Tehran. But this afternoon from the Oval Office, the president claimed the killing in Iran had suddenly stopped.
We were told that the killing in Iran is stopping, and it's stopped, and it's stopping. And there's no plan for executions or an execution or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset. They told me that there'll be no executions, and so I hope that's true.
Does this mean military action is now off the table against Iran?
Well, we're going to watch and see what the process is, but we were given a very good statement by people that are aware of what's going on.
A U.S.-based human rights activist news agency estimating that more than 2,500 people have been killed in Iran amid the unrest, the vast majority of those deaths being protesters. That death toll also includes 12 people under the age of 18 and more than 100 people affiliated with the Iranian government or military. Now, we should note the Iranian government has not released its own figures when it comes to the death toll, and there is limited information coming out of Iran due to a nationwide internet blackout. That U.S.-based group compiles these estimates based on supporters in Iran cross-checking information and the data going through multiple internal checks. The government of Iran has blamed its foreign enemies for the unrest. Meanwhile, also at the White House today, Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with the foreign ministers of Denmark and Greenland after President Trump's statement on social media this morning that the U.S. needs Greenland for national security purposes, adding anything less than that would be, quote, unacceptable. The president also doubling down while speaking to reporters in the Oval Office this afternoon. Take a look.
Certainly, I'm not going to give up options, but it's very important. Greenland's very important for the national security, including of Denmark. And the problem is not a thing that Denmark can do about it if Russia or China wants to occupy Greenland. But there's everything we can do.
The foreign ministers calling the meeting with President Trump and Trump administration officials frank and constructive, but adding that fundamental differences remain.
For us, ideas that would not respect territorial integrity of the Kingdom of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlandic people are, of course, totally unacceptable. We agreed that it makes sense to try to sit down on a high level to explore whether there is possibilities to accommodate the concerns of the president, while we at the same time respect the red lines of the Kingdom of Denmark. So this is the work we will start. Whether that is doable, I don't know.
Now, Denmark also announcing today it is increasing its military presence in and around Greenland in coordination with NATO allies, citing security tensions in the Arctic region. Joining me now is NBC News senior White House correspondent Garrett Haake, NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel, and NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube, both on set with me right here. Garrett, let me start with you at the White House and these comments that we heard from President Trump about Iran saying that he believes the killing has stopped. What do you make of what we heard from the president?
Well, it's certainly a marked departure from the tone of the president over the last couple days. I'm thinking back to Friday when he said that if the Iranian regime started shooting, the U.S. would start shooting back. Yesterday, he posted a message to Iranian dissidents saying help is on the way. Today, he seems to accept a line from unnamed Iranian sources that the killing has stopped. As you laid out in the intro, Kristen, there's been significant killings, significant regime violence against its people in the last couple of days. And the Trump administration had staked out this kind of maximalist position that they would not back away from the Iranian dissidents here, that they would support protesters, and that they would act against the regime if there were violence against those protesters. Here you seem to hear the president say he's convinced that any violence against protesters has stopped. Now, we'll see if there's any evidence presented here, and I'll point out that he also didn't take military options off the table, but this did seem like a pretty marked reversal from the president.
Yeah, let me get reaction from Courtney and Richard here. Court, let me start with you. What are we watching today? We're anticipating another briefing for the president of potential options. What kind of options has he been given so far?
Yeah, so why today is a little bit more intense than maybe we have seen in recent days since the president's been talking about the possibility of any kind of action in Iran is because the president has now provided the Pentagon and the military with the military objectives that he's looking for in Iran. So not just saying we're going to act, we're going to support the president. He has told them this is what I want to accomplish out of some sort of action there. So the military always has these plans ready. They're able to tailor them based on what he wants, and that's what's being presented to him today. So we could really have a yes or no decision whether the president wants to move forward. And the range of options is still everything that we've been talking about all week, the possibility of what we kind of refer to as gray zone options, right? So short of kinetic or military strikes, all the way up to possibility for military strikes in Iran.
Richard, what do you make of this moment and what we heard from President Trump in the Oval Office? And of course, the death toll continues to climb in Iran. I mean, give us your reporting from the ground there.
So I'm still trying to digest this. He said this a short while ago, and it's very different. As of yesterday, President Trump looked like he was going to take some sort of military action. He said he was going to take military action. The State Department said, we're going to do something if the killings continue, and specifically referenced that 26-year-old activist his family says was scheduled to be executed today. Now President Trump's saying, well, we're going to wait and see what happens. He spoke with some Iranian officials who assured him that the killings have stopped. He's taking a pause. And you were just reporting yesterday that there were officials in the region, Arab officials, Israeli officials, who were concerned that the U.S. was going too fast into this. So I'm not sure that the military option is off the table, but maybe he's just pushing back the deadline a little bit, perhaps to get ready, perhaps to get the equipment in place, perhaps to come up with a more coordinated plan. But he's definitely seemed to be slowing things down today.
Courtney, he certainly did talk a little bit about what Richard was noting, which is that there were these Arab leaders who were encouraging the White House to pull back a little bit. What were you hearing about that?
Yeah, and Israeli officials. And it's not that they're saying don't take any military action at all, but they're more stressing that any military action needs to be more decisive when it happens. So if in fact the goal here is decapitation of the Iranian regime, decapitate Tehran, then it doesn't seem that the situation on the ground is ready for that at this point. And also, what the military has in the region isn't what it was back in June when the U.S. took the strikes against the nuclear facilities.
Close.
It's not even close. And that's not just for being able to support the military operations, but it's really critically for being able to defend against an Iranian response or retaliation.
Why is that significant that you're saying it's not even close?
Well, look at what just happened in Venezuela. And they're very different countries, but just look what was in place for Venezuela. There was aircraft carrier strike group, submarines, drones, many aircraft, buildup of thousands of troops in Puerto Rico, months and months of preparation to carry out this commando strike against a country that America knows, frankly, much better than Iran, is much closer, that America has more familiarity with culturally and otherwise. The U.S. has moved a lot of its assets out of the Middle East. After the Gaza peace agreement, a lot of the assets kind of left. So if you're going to send them back, that takes a little bit of time. And Iran has the capacity to attack tankers, has the capacity to attack American military bases, to attack Israel, to do cyber operations. So you pick a fight with a country that can fight back. You want to prepare for it at the very least. Certainly the military commanders who would be tasked with carrying it out would want time to prepare for it.
Well, just to follow up on that point, Richard, President Trump said that he wants to win. And everything that you're mapping out just explains how complicated it would be for the United States to have any type of decisive victory in this moment.
Well, you don't want to operate at the speed of emotion.
Right.
You want to have a plan in place. Now, it doesn't mean that the plan is off. People I'm speaking to at a variety of different levels think that there is still going to be some action taken. That the Iran is still in President Trump's crosshairs. So maybe this is just pushing it back. Maybe it's a diversionary tactic. There could be something tonight on a smaller scale. We really don't know. But this is President Trump sort of signaling to the world, to Iran, perhaps to others in the Middle East, Israel, Arab allies coming, that he doesn't plan to do a major regime change level operation tonight or in the next couple of days, perhaps.
Court, is that your sense, based on your reporting and based on what we heard from the president?
Yeah, the president's boxed himself in. He has said he's going to take some sort of action to support the protesters, whether it's today, whenever it happens. He's boxed himself into doing something. So now he's done this before, where he has said he's going to act on something and has not. The one thing that's fascinating watching President Trump when it comes to these sort of military actions is he loves to brag about the covert stuff too. So it is very possible that if they do move into this sort of gray zone territory, which generally is carried out by intelligence operatives or sometimes sort of the more elite military, if the president acknowledges that the U.S. has done it.
And the protesters the protesters are not in control of the streets right now in Iran in a way that they were a couple of days ago. The government is finding its feet a bit more. There are more pro-government activists on the street. There's still a lot of opposition, but they're happening more at night than they were just a couple of days ago.
Well, the images just showcase how incredibly tense the situation is on the ground there. Let me turn to Garrett and talk about another major focus at the White House today, another foreign policy focus. We know that top officials there met with officials from Greenland and Denmark. What came out of that meeting, Garrett? What were the key takeaways?
Well, the president says he is being briefed essentially right now on that meeting. What we heard from the Danish foreign minister at his news conference was that it was a, quote, frank but productive conversation. Kristen, as you know, that's sometimes Washington speak for something to just below a fistfight breaking out at a meeting, right? I mean, this is not the type of thing that gives you a lot of confidence that a lot of progress was made. The Danes came out and said they want to put together a high-level working group to continue to talk with the president about this. Another sort of common Washington stalling tactic for a problem without much of a solution. Here you have a situation in which the Danes say Greenland is not for sale. Greenlanders say we do not want to be sold or become part of the United States. And the president seems wholly unwilling to accept anything less than that, even in this Oval Office meeting just a short time ago, mocking Greenland and the Danes, saying they've upped their defense from 1 dog sled to 2. The great irony here is Greenland's defense against Russia and China is us. It's NATO. It's the alliance here, which a lot of outside analysts and, by the way, Republican politicians are warning the president he could break permanently by being too rash on Greenland.
Richard, what do you make of the developments today? And we have Denmark increasing their military presence around Greenland amidst this threat from the president to go in and take it, potentially by military force if necessary? So
NATO countries are absolutely livid, terrified, outraged. The list could go on and on of adjectives to use. They're looking at a situation where one NATO country potentially just steals a piece of land from another NATO country and says, and that would be the U.S. stealing from Denmark, and then says, yeah, and what are you going to do about it?
Right.
And they're not built for that. And European allies say, you do this, you're going to undercut NATO, you're going to destroy this military alliance, the greatest military alliance that has kept peace in the hemisphere since World War II, kept the Soviet Union at bay, is sort of trying to keep Russia from going beyond Ukraine. And they're saying publicly, this is all at risk. Don't do this. You want to protect Greenland? There's already American base there. You want to expand that American base? Go ahead. But why are you talking about occupying it, taking away, ripping it from another NATO ally? You're going to destroy the alliance.
Courtney, it is just extraordinary to hear the president say that he's not taking military action off the table. And as Richard maps out so clearly, the concern is that it would blow up NATO.
Yeah. And it's very possible that it would, by the way. I mean, I think that's very possible. So the real question is this all about President Trump putting pressure to ultimately get the gain of getting Greenland without military force. But look, we thought that was what was going to happen in Venezuela. We thought that his whole goal there was military pressure on the people around Maduro and on Maduro himself to ultimately get him to step down without the military stepping foot. And that's not what happened here. And we do know that there are discussions about diplomatic and even legal methods that they might be able to use to actually detain Greenland.
You know, this is not entirely new. The U.S. has expressed interest in controlling Greenland before. At the height of the Cold War, when it was the U.S. versus USSR, the U.S. wanted to put nuclear weapons in Greenland, but that was de-escalated. The ultimate solution was to leave this military base there, which serves to monitor missile defense. It looks up into space, it monitors satellites. All of that is happening right now. The difference is President Trump says, no, I want it. And you're going to give it to me, and you're going to give it to me, or I'm going to take it. And NATO just isn't built for that kind of threat.
And European allies trying desperately to find an offer. Garrett, final question to you. Based on your conversations at the White House, do you have a sense of the timeline that the president has in his head for potentially taking Greenland?
It's hard to say, Kristen. I mean, this is something he really started talking about early in the term. It went away for months. We didn't hear another word about it. I don't get the sense that there's imminence here. I mean, the fact that we're still discussing everything from a purchase to a referendum to military action suggests to me that we're not close. To borrow the military phrasing here, I think this is kind of like a political shaping operation, not anything close to actually pulling the trigger, if you will, on Greenland.
All right. Well, great conversation. Great start to the show. Garrett, Richard, and Courtney, thank you all so much.
We thank you for watching. And remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.